The city never truly slept. Keanu felt it every time he finished a long day of filming and walked through the streets of Los Angeles. The crowds became smaller, the noise became softer, but the city was still awake in its own way. Cars hummed in the distance, their headlights glowing in the dark. Neon signs flickered, some buzzing as their lights blinked on and off. Restaurants closed their doors one by one, flipping their signs to say closed for the night. But even then, the city had a heartbeat, a rhythm that never really stopped. Keanu didn't usually eat fast food. He preferred something healthier, something fresh. But tonight he was too tired to care. He just wanted something quick and easy, something that didn't take much thought. That was how, just before midnight, he found himself walking into a nearly empty KFC. The restaurant was quiet, almost too quiet. A couple sat by the window, sharing a small meal and talking softly. A young worker wiped down the tables, moving slowly, like he wasn't really paying attention to what he was doing. Behind the counter, the manager stood counting money, flipping through bills with a focused expression. Keanu placed his order, took his drink, and found a seat toward the back. He let out a slow breath, feeling the tiredness settle into his shoulders. His body ached from a long day, and all he wanted was to eat, rest for a moment, and then go home. But then something caught his eye. In the farthest corner of the restaurant, two little girls were sitting at a table. They looked about 6 or 7 years old. Both wore pink Barbie shirts that looked a little worn, as if they had been washed too many times. In their hands, they held a crumpled piece of paper, gripping it tightly like it was something precious. But what stood out the most, what made Keanu's stomach twist, was that they weren't eating. No fries, no drinks, nothing. They just sat there, completely still, their eyes locked on the restaurant's door as if they were waiting for someone to walk in. Keanu felt something was wrong. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. He had spent years learning when to step in and when to walk away. But something about these two girls didn't feel right. Every time an employee passed near them, the girls shrank back slightly, like they didn't want to be noticed. Keanu watched them carefully, his actor's eye catching every little movement, every nervous glance. Maybe their parents were in the bathroom. Maybe they had stepped outside to get something from the car. But as the minutes passed and no one came, that uneasy feeling in Keanu's chest only grew stronger. He thought about letting it go. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it wasn't his place. But then it happened. The younger girl, who couldn't have been older than 6, rubbed her eyes with the sleeve of her pink shirt. And Keanu realized she was crying. In that moment he knew. He couldn't just walk away. Keanu hesitated for only a second before making a decision. He didn't want to scare them. He knew that, no matter how much he tried to blend in, people often recognized him. But these girls weren't looking at him with excitement or curiosity. They were afraid. Keanu took a slow breath, grabbed his drink, and walked toward their table with calm, measured steps. He didn't sit down. He didn't lean in too close. He just stood at a safe distance and spoke softly. "Hey there," he said gently. "Everything okay?" The girls didn't answer. The older one, around 7 or 8 years old, lowered her gaze, gripping the crumpled piece of paper even tighter. The younger one shrank back, pressing herself against her sister's arm like she was the only thing keeping her safe. Keanu understood. They didn't trust him. And from the looks of it, they didn't trust anyone in this restaurant. Keanu glanced around. The manager was still behind the counter. But he wasn't looking at the girls with surprise, like he had just noticed them. No, he was watching them with a look that said he already knew they were there. In the kitchen, 2 employees whispered among themselves. One of them glanced toward the girls before quickly looking away. They knew something. But for some reason, no one was doing anything. Keanu clenched his jaw. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to ask the manager why those girls were still sitting there so late at night. But he also knew that scared children didn't open up to people who pushed too hard. So, instead, he did something simple. He walked back to the counter, ordered an extra soda, and as he passed by the girls' table again, he quietly placed the drink in front of them. No pressure. No words. Then he returned to his seat. For a few seconds the girls didn't move. The younger one glanced at the cup, then at her sister. But the older girl didn't even look at it. Keanu waited. But to his surprise, they didn't touch the drink. Not hunger. Not thirst. Fear. A cold shiver ran down Keanu's spine. He looked back at the employees. The manager quickly looked away. One of the kitchen workers wiped his hands on his apron, shifting nervously. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Keanu knew he needed answers. He stood up and walked to the counter where a young cashier stood. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I just have a quick question." The cashier looked nervous before Keanu even spoke. Those girls over there, Keanu said, nodding slightly toward them. Are they waiting for someone? The cashier hesitated. His eyes darted toward the manager, who was now watching them closely. Then finally he answered, They've been here since this morning. Keanu's stomach dropped. Since this morning? He repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. And no one has come for them? The cashier swallowed hard. He looked down, avoiding Keanu's eyes. He didn't want to talk about it, but Keanu already knew. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. And he wasn't leaving until he found out what it was. Keanu returned to his seat, but now he couldn't relax. Those girls had been there since the morning. Alone. Waiting for someone who never came. He looked at them again. The younger girl fidgeted slightly, swinging her feet under the table. But the older girl just sat still, her eyes locked on the crumpled paper in her hands. What did that note say? And why were they holding onto it so tightly, like it was the only thing they had? Keanu knew he couldn't force a conversation. They were already too scared. But there was another way. He leaned forward slightly, his voice soft. If you want me to leave, I will. For the first time, the older girl looked up. Just for a second. But in that second, Keanu saw something. She wanted to say something. But she was afraid. The younger girl gripped her sister's arm even tighter, as if silently begging her not to speak. Silence filled the space between them. Keanu didn't push. He just waited. Then he changed his approach. Can I ask you something? The older girl hesitated. That paper, is it important? This time, something shifted in her eyes. She looked down at the note. Then back at Keanu. Like she was deciding if she could trust him. Finally, without a word, she slid the paper across the table. Keanu picked up the crumpled paper very carefully, as if it was something that could break. The paper looked dirty and old, like it had been held onto for a long time. Some of the words were hard to read because the ink was smudged, but the most important part of the message was still clear. Wait at KFC. Don't leave. I will come for you, Mom. Keanu felt a strange feeling in his chest. These two girls sitting in the restaurant weren't just lost. They were waiting. But waiting for who? And why had no one come for them? He looked at the older girl, who was now holding her little sister's hand tightly. Your mom told you to stay here? Keanu asked gently. The older girl nodded slowly. Did she say when she'd be back? The girl hesitated. She looked at her sister first, then at Keanu. She seemed unsure whether she should say anything. Finally, in a soft whisper, she said she'd be back soon. Keanu took a slow breath. But soon was supposed to be this morning. It was already late in the evening. Something was very wrong. He looked back at the note, reading the words again. Something about it felt strange. He turned back to the girl and asked, How long have you been waiting? The girl's lips trembled before she answered. Since the morning. Keanu felt his chest get heavy. Their mother had told them to stay here, but if she was coming back soon, why wasn't she here yet? Why had she left them alone all day? He glanced around the restaurant, paying closer attention to the workers. The employees looked uneasy. Some of them kept glancing at the girls, but none of them went over to talk to them. They knew something. Keanu noticed the manager watching from the corner. The moment their eyes met, the manager quickly looked away. Keanu's heart started beating faster. Something was going on. He stood up and walked toward the counter. The cashier, a young man who couldn't be older than 20, looked nervous as Keanu approached. Can I ask you something? Keanu said, keeping his voice low and calm. The young worker swallowed hard. Sure, sir. Keanu gestured toward the girls. Does their mom work here? The worker hesitated. He glanced at the manager as if asking what to say. The manager sighed and gave a small nod. Yes, the cashier finally admitted. His voice sounded uneasy. She works in the kitchen. But she didn't come to work today. A cold feeling crawled up Keanu's spine. She missed her shift? The young man nodded, avoiding Keanu's eyes. She never misses work, he murmured. But today, she just didn't show up. Keanu turned back to the girls. Their mother hadn't come to work. But before she disappeared, she left them a note telling them to stay. What? Then, like a heavy weight, the answer hit Keanu. Their mom knew something was wrong. Maybe she didn't know where to go. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she was in danger. But the KFC was the only place she could think of where her daughters would be safe. It was warm. It had food. And no one would force them to leave. Maybe she had hoped that someone would help them if she couldn't come back. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, trying to understand what this all meant. Then suddenly a cold feeling ran down his spine. Something made him turn toward the window. Across the street, A man was standing very still. He wasn't moving. He wasn't walking past. He was watching. A cigarette burned between his lips. His hands were stuffed into his coat pockets. His face was partly hidden in the shadows, but Keanu could feel it. This man wasn't just standing there for no reason. He was waiting. A sick feeling grew in Keanu's stomach. This man wasn't just a random person. He was watching the girls. Is this their stepfather? Keanu thought. Is he waiting to see if they leave the restaurant? Keanu's hands curled into fists. I won't let that happen. He turned back to the sisters. The older girl was still gripping the note, her fingers shaking slightly. The younger one held on to her sister, sensing that something was wrong. They didn't know it, but they were in danger. Keanu had to do something. He walked back to the counter. The manager stiffened. I need to use your phone, Keanu said firmly. The manager hesitated. He didn't like this. Sir, we can't. Keanu's voice was calm but strong. Now. It wasn't a request. The manager sighed, then pointed toward a phone near the register. Keanu picked it up and dialed. Hello, he said, keeping his voice low. I need to report 2 children alone in a restaurant. Their mother is missing. The dispatcher on the other end asked for details. Their mom works here, but she didn't come in. No one has come for them. And Keanu's eyes flicked back to the window. The man was still there. Watching. Waiting. I think they're in danger, Keanu said, his voice sharp. The dispatcher said they would send someone. But Keanu could hear it in their tone. They don't understand how serious this is. Please, he pressed. Send someone fast. He hung up and turned back to the girls. He had to stay calm. He didn't want to scare them even more. But before he could step closer, the restaurant phone rang. The sudden sound made the workers jump. One of them hesitated before picking it up. KFC, how can I? The worker froze. Her eyes widened. Then slowly she looked at Keanu. It's for you. Keanu's heart dropped. Slowly he took the phone from her shaking hands. Hello, he said. A woman's voice came through. She sounded scared. Out of breath. Please, she whispered. Please tell me they're still there. Keanu froze. It was their mother. Keanu felt his chest get tight. The way the woman spoke, he could hear the fear in her voice. They're here, Keanu said firmly. They're safe. From the other end of the phone he heard a sob. She was crying. Thank God, she whispered. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. He could hear her breathing fast like she was trying not to cry too much. Are you their mother? He asked softly. There was a small pause. Yes, she finally answered, but her voice was shaky like she was scared to say it. Where are you? Keanu asked. The phone made a crackling sound. He could hear footsteps, fast ones like someone running. I'm close, she said. But he's here too. Keanu knew exactly who she meant. He looked up and stared through the restaurant window. Outside, a man stood on the street. He held a cigarette, the tiny orange light glowing in the dark. He wasn't moving. He wasn't just standing there for no reason. He was waiting. Keanu's stomach felt weird. His heart started to beat faster. He couldn't let that man take the girls. Listen to me, Keanu said. Come through the side door. Now. There was silence. Then. Okay. The call ended. A second later, the side door flew open. A woman ran inside. She was breathing hard like she had been running for a long time. Her eyes moved quickly, searching for something. Then she saw them. Girls, she cried out, her voice shaking with happiness, fear, and love all mixed together. The 2 little girls turned. The younger one ran first, her tiny feet tapping against the floor. She threw herself into her mother's arms, crying loudly. The older girl waited, just for a second, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then she ran too. Their mother dropped to her knees and hugged them tight, shaking as she cried. I thought I'd never see you again, she whispered, her voice breaking. The girls held on to her, their little hands clutching her clothes, their bodies shaking as they cried too. Keanu stood back and let them have this moment. But he knew it wasn't over yet. After what felt like a long time, the mother looked up at Keanu. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were filled with thanks. Thank you, she whispered, for staying with them. Keanu nodded. What happened? He asked, even though he already had a guess. She swallowed and looked at the window. When she saw him, the man outside, her whole body went stiff. She hugged the girls tighter. He wouldn't let me leave, she said. Keanu's stomach turned. He had already guessed, but hearing it out loud made it worse. Is he their stepfather? He asked. She nodded, her face full of guilt. I tried to do everything right, she said. I planned to leave before he got home, but... Her voice cracked. He locked the door. He said if I left, I'd never see my kids again. Keanu took a slow breath, trying to push down the anger rising inside him. How did you get out? He asked. Her hands shook as she brushed a strand of hair from the younger girl's face. I waited for him to fall asleep, she said. Then I climbed out the window. Keanu watched her closely. The way she held onto the girls, he knew she wasn't going back. She couldn't. Do you have anywhere to go? He asked. She shook her head. Fresh tears filled her eyes. No. Keanu didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I need help, he said. A mother and 2 kids are in danger. The person on the other end understood right away. We're on our way, they said. Keanu hung up and turned back to the mother. You're leaving tonight, he told her. She blinked like she wasn't sure she heard him right. But where? She whispered. A safe place, Keanu said. He won't find you. She opened her mouth, like she wanted to say it wasn't possible. I don't have any money, Don't worry about that, Keanu said. Just trust me. She broke down again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. Minutes later, a black car stopped outside. A man, someone Keanu trusted, stepped out. He gave Keanu a nod. Ready? He asked. The mother looked at her daughters, then at Keanu. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Keanu gave her a small smile. Just take care of them, he said. She took a deep breath and got into the car, holding her daughters close. Keanu watched as they drove away into the night. He felt the weight in his chest finally lift. Outside, the man with the cigarette saw them leave. He flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushed it under his boot, and walked away into the darkness. Keanu knew this wasn't truly over. But for now they were safe, and that was all that mattered. As the car drove off, the mother reached for Keanu's hand one last time. You saved us tonight, she whispered. They'll never forget this. Keanu squeezed her hand gently, then let go, watching as they disappeared into the night. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.